The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was, Winifred Alcott had always maintained, the worst possible day for anything important to happen. Tuesdays had no dignity, and yet here she stood in the anteroom of the Drayford Assembly Hall, a letter pressed against her ribs beneath her coat, while the man who had spent the better part of her girlhood making her feel like furniture prepared to address the assembled company. Cornelius Fenn, heir to a modest fortune, possessor of an immodest opinion of himself, stood at the center of the room with his chest arranged in the manner of men who have never been told, plainly and to their face, that they are tiresome. He was announcing his engagement. Winifred knew this because she had received the same announcement card as everyone else, printed on creamstock with his family crest embossed in the corner, which she thought was a great deal of effort for news that would bore most people within a fortnight. "I had expected," Fenn said, loud enough to ensure the remark carried to the edges of the room, "that certain hopeful parties might have made themselves scarce this evening." He looked directly at Winifred when he said it. He had always looked directly at her when he said things designed to wound, because he was efficient in his cruelties. "But perhaps no one informed Miss Alcott that the season is over. No one wanted you, my dear. The fact appears not to have penetrated." The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when people are deciding whether to laugh or pretend they heard nothing. Several of Fenn's companions chose the former. Winifred's friend Rosalind, standing 3 feet to her left, made a sound like a kettle beginning to boil. Winifred did not flush. She did not look away. She reached into her coat, removed the letter, and said, with the particular calm of someone who has been saving a sentence for exactly the right moment, "How thoughtful of you to worry on my behalf, Mr. Fenn. Though I confess your concern arrived somewhat late. I was married this morning." The silence that followed was of an entirely different quality. 3 months earlier, Winifred had not been married. 3 months earlier, she had been precisely what Cornelius Fenn believed her to be, a woman of 29, with a modest income, a good mind that society had not requested, and a collection of pressed botanical specimens that occupied 3 full drawers of her writing desk. She was not beautiful in the way that stopped conversations. She was beautiful in the way that rewarded attention. Fine-boned, with dark eyes that missed very little, and hands that were always slightly ink-stained, because she illustrated scientific texts for a publisher on Harrow Street and was not embarrassed by the evidence. All of this is to say, when Winifred Alcott arrived at the house on Vellum Lane on a cold October evening with a commission she had not sought and a motive she had not disclosed, she was not the sort of woman one expected to change the course of anything. She had been sent by her publisher, Mr. Garvey, to retrieve a manuscript. Specifically, a handwritten treatise on botanical taxonomy that had been promised to the press 3 months prior and had not arrived. The author, listed in Garvey's records only as R. Aldenmore, had not responded to 3 letters and 1 personal visit from Garvey's assistant, who had returned pale and vague and subsequently tendered his resignation without explanation. This was, Garvey had explained, a problem of some financial consequence. The treatise had been promised to a buyer. The buyer was impatient. Garvey was, beneath his professional composure, frightened. Winifred had agreed to go because she needed the commission, because she was curious by nature, and because she had not entirely believed the assistant's account of the visit. People who resigned without explanation were, in her experience, people who had been embarrassed by something they did not wish to describe. She had assumed she would find a reclusive eccentric with a disordered study and a reluctance to be interrupted. She had brought her sketchbook, because she always brought her sketchbook, and a small lamp, because Vellum Lane was not well lit. What she had not brought was any expectation of the man who opened the door. He was tall in the way that required rearranging one's sense of a doorway. Not imposing, he stood without any apparent effort to impress, which made the impression more complete. He wore a coat that had been well made once and repaired since with evident skill, but no particular vanity. His hair was dark and somewhat long, as though he had simply forgotten to attend to it, and his eyes were the color of old amber, not gold, not brown, but the specific warm depth of something that had been waiting a very long time. He looked at her. Not the way Cornelius Fenn looked at her, which was to say the way one looks at furniture one does not intend to purchase. He looked at her the way a person looks at something that has arrived unexpectedly and requires genuine thought. "You are not Garvey," he said. "No," Winifred said. "Garvey sent me. I am Miss Alcott. I illustrate the text your publisher produces. I have come about the manuscript." He considered this for a moment. The assistant he sent previously was taller. "He also resigned," Winifred said. "I have not resigned. I find it generally premature until one has at least seen the study." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the structural antecedent of one. He stepped back and held the door open. "By all means," he said, "come and see the study." His name, he told her, was Rafferty Aldenmore. He offered no further genealogy, no title, no indication of how long he had occupied the house on Vellum Lane, or what he did when he was not failing to deliver manuscripts to impatient publishers. The study, when she reached it, was not disordered. It was, in fact, extraordinarily organized, shelf upon shelf of botanical specimens, pressed and labeled in a hand so fine it might have been engraved, alongside texts in 4 languages, correspondence bundled with methodical care, and, on the central desk, a manuscript that was very nearly complete. "You have written it," Winifred said, touching the edge of the pages without lifting them, because she had manners. "Why haven't you sent it?" Rafferty Aldenmore stood by the window, which he had not opened, and looked at the manuscript with the expression of a man regarding something he has been avoiding for reasons he considers reasonable and suspects are not. "It requires illustrations," he said. The previous illustrator found the subject matter distressing. Winifred opened her sketchbook. "What was the subject matter?" "Plants that bloom only at night," he said, "and the creatures that depend on them." She had looked at him then, really looked, in the way she looked at specimens, noting detail without flinching, and said, "I have no objection to the dark." She had meant it as a professional statement. She understood later that it had been something more like a declaration. She returned the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. She told Garvey she was making progress, which was true. She did not tell Garvey what else she was doing, which was learning the dimensions of Rafferty Aldenmore's silences, how long they lasted, what they meant, which ones were comfortable and which carried weight. He was, she concluded, the most well-read person she had ever encountered. He spoke of events from 50 years prior with the specificity of an eyewitness. He knew the names of botanists who had died before her grandmother was born. He moved through his house at night with a sureness that had nothing to do with familiarity, and everything to do with the fact that he did not, she gradually noticed, require a lamp. She was noting these things not only because she was curious, though she was constitutionally and helplessly curious, but because Mr. Garvey had asked her to. This was the part she had not mentioned to Rafferty Aldenmore. Garvey's buyer was not, it transpired, interested only in the manuscript. He was interested in the author, a man named Prentice Halloway, who collected rare things, objects, texts, and occasionally people, had heard rumors about Aldenmore, rumors of a particular kind. Halloway had offered Garvey a considerable sum to confirm them, and Garvey, who was a practical man in difficult financial circumstances, had sent Winifred to do the confirming. She was to observe, to report, to say, with the precision that made her illustrations so valued, what she saw and what she concluded. She had not been told what Halloway intended to do with the information. She had told herself she did not need to know. By her 4th visit, she had sketched 17 of the night-blooming specimens and begun to understand that Rafferty Aldenmore had been watching them grow for considerably longer than any living botanist could claim. By her 5th visit, he had shown her a letter from a colleague dated 1743, signed with a familiarity that suggested personal acquaintance. She had looked at the letter and then at him and said nothing, because she was not yet ready for the sentence that would follow. By her 6th visit, he had made tea, badly, with the cheerful incompetence of a man who has never needed to prioritize it. And they had sat in the study while rain accumulated against the windows, and he had told her, without being asked, that he had been a physician once, in another century, in a city that no longer existed under that name. Once, she said. The practice became complicated, he said. I imagine, she said, that most things do over time. He had looked at her with those amber eyes and said, You are not frightened. I am gathering information, she said, which was true, and also the thing that made her feel most wretched, sitting there with his badly made tea going cold in her hands. The guilt had arrived gradually, the way the cold arrives in October, not as a sudden event, but as a slow accumulation that one day becomes impossible to ignore. She had begun writing her reports to Garvey in shorter and shorter sentences, omitting more and more of what she actually observed, because the gap between what she was doing and what she was being paid to do had grown too wide to step across without noticing. She had not told Rafferty Aldenmore her true purpose. She had told herself this was professional discretion. She had begun to understand it was cowardice dressed in sensible clothing. The discovery, when it came, was not dramatic. It rarely was, in Winifred's experience. Drama required an audience, and Rafferty Aldenmore had always preferred precision. She arrived on a Thursday, not her usual day, because Garvey had sent a note requiring a report by Friday, and she had nothing new to give him, and had come, she told herself, to sketch 2 more specimens. She let herself in through the garden gate, which he had given her leave to use, and crossed to the study window, which was lit. He was at the desk, reading. In his hand was a letter she recognized, not by its contents, but by the paper, the fold, the particular shade of Garvey's stationery. She had seen enough of it to know it at 10 paces. It was not one of her reports. It was a letter from Halloway to Garvey, outlining what he intended to do with the confirmation she had been sent to provide. It had arrived, apparently, in the same post as a manuscript query, and Garvey's assistant had included it in the parcel by mistake. Rafferty Aldenmore read with the stillness of someone who has learned that visible reactions are a luxury. He did not move. He did not look up when she came through the door. He set the letter on the desk with the care of a man setting down something he would prefer to throw. Halloway, he said, intends to present me to the Royal Society as a specimen. He believes that proof of my existence would make him the most significant collector of the age. Winifred said nothing. He hired Garvey to confirm what he suspected, Rafferty said. He looked up then. His eyes held something she had no ready word for, not rage, not betrayal, but the specific grief of a man who had been careful for a very long time and had made, apparently, one miscalculation. And Garvey sent you. Yes, she said, because she was not going to pretend otherwise. She had promised herself that much. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. It was the kind that has weight and edges. How much did you tell him? Rafferty said. Not enough for certainty, she said. I told him you were reclusive and well-read. I did not confirm anything he could use. Why not? She looked at him, at the badly made tea things still on the desk, at the letter in his hand, at the study that had become, over 6 Tuesdays and 1 Thursday, the most interesting room she had ever occupied. Because it stopped being a commission somewhere around the 3rd visit, she said, and I did not know how to tell you that I had come for the wrong reasons, because by then I had stayed for the right ones. He stood. He was very still in the way that very old things are still, not passive but contained. You should leave, he said. I need you to leave now. She left. The walk back to her lodgings on Carver Street took 40 minutes in the rain, and she did not open her umbrella because she was occupied with the particular arithmetic of having done something she could not undo and not yet knowing what to do next. Garvey's office the following morning was warm and smelled of paper and anxiety. He was at his desk when she arrived, and he had the expression of a man who has recently understood that a plan has developed complications. I am withdrawing from the commission, Winifred said, before he could speak. Miss Alcott. Holloway's letter was in the parcel, she said. He has it now. He knows what you were paid to do, and he knows I was the instrument. She set her sketchbook on his desk, the one with 17 botanical illustrations of night-blooming specimens, which were the finest work she had ever produced, and which she was not going to allow to be used as evidence. I am keeping these. The commission is finished. Whatever Holloway does next is between you and him. Garvey looked at the sketchbook, then at her, then at the wall, where he appeared to find no useful advice. He will pursue other means, he said. He is not a patient man. No, Winifred said. I expect he isn't. She walked out into the November street and stood for a moment in the cold, considering what Holloway's impatience might mean in practical terms. He had money. He had connections to the kind of institutional authority that could compel things, examinations, inquiries, the sort of official attention that, once directed at a person, was very difficult to redirect. He did not need Garvey's confirmation anymore. He had enough rumor and enough resources to cause significant damage on rumor alone. She thought about Rafferty Aldenmore in his study on Vellum Lane, reading a letter with that terrible stillness, and she thought about the 17 specimens she had illustrated, and she thought about badly made tea, and she made a decision. She went to see Rosalind. Rosalind Crabb was 34, practical, and the only person Winifred trusted with anything she actually cared about. She kept a small law office on Brentham Street. Not her own, she was not permitted to practice, but she managed the correspondence and organization for a solicitor named Mr. Vane, who had the good sense to know that Rosalind understood the law better than he did, and the good grace not to mention it publicly. Tell me about Prentice Holloway, Winifred said, sitting across from her in the small back office that smelled of beeswax and old paper. Rosalind's expression shifted in the way it shifted when she was interested but cautious. He collects, she said, living specimens primarily. He has applied 3 times to the Royal Society for recognition of his methods. He has been refused 3 times on the grounds that his methods are unethical. He is not a man who accepts being refused. He is attempting to compel an examination of a private individual, Winifred said, on the basis of unconfirmed rumor. Is there a legal mechanism to prevent it? Rosalind looked at her with the patience of someone who has already done the calculation. If the individual in question were to make a formal complaint of harassment through institutional channels, and if there were a witness to the nature of Holloway's correspondence, and if that witness were prepared to testify, yes. The Society's charter includes provisions against the compelled examination of any person without documented consent. Holloway has been pushing against that boundary for years. A formal complaint, properly filed, would end his membership and his access to Society resources. He would still have his private resources. Yes, Rosalind said, but without institutional backing, his ability to compel anything becomes considerably more limited. She paused. Winifred, what have you done? Something I should not have, Winifred said, and something I am now attempting to correct. I need to go back to Vellum Lane. Rosalind looked at her for a long moment. Take your umbrella this time, she said. You look like you walked through the river yesterday. The house on Vellum Lane was dark when she arrived, which told her nothing, since it was frequently dark in ways that had nothing to do with absence. She knocked. She waited. She knocked again with the specific persistence of someone who has decided that dignity is a secondary concern. The door opened. Rafferty Aldenmore looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent several days being angry and has arrived, exhaustedly, at something more complicated. I have not come to apologize, Winifred said, because she had thought carefully about this on the walk over. I came under false pretenses and I did not tell you, and those are facts that an apology does not undo. I have come because Holloway is going to move without Garvey's confirmation, and because I know how to stop him, and because I cannot do it without your participation. He looked at her for a long time. You are telling me, he said, that the woman who was sent to expose me is now offering to protect me. Yes. That is, he said, A remarkable amount of audacity for a Tuesday. It is Thursday, she said. Is it? He stepped back from the door. You had better come in. She told him about Rosalind, about the Royal Society's charter provisions, about the formal complaint mechanism, and what it would require. He listened without interrupting, which she had come to understand was his way of indicating that he considered something worth his full attention. I would need to be named in the complaint, he said when she had finished. Publicly, yes. That carries its own risks. Less than the alternative, she said. Holloway's institutional access is the dangerous part. Without it, he is a wealthy man with a theory. With it, he is a mechanism. Rafferty was quiet for a moment. He was standing by the window again, in the particular way he stood when he was thinking, not restless, not still, but somewhere between the two. What do you want in return? He said. You are not doing this from altruism. You came here with a purpose once before. What is the purpose now? It was, she thought, a fair question. She considered it honestly. I want to correct what I did, she said. That is the primary thing. And I want... She stopped, then continued, because she had decided on honesty and she was going to maintain it. I want to finish the illustrations, the specimens. The work is good, and it would be a waste to leave it incomplete. He looked at her. The shift around his mouth did something her vocabulary had no word for. A small, careful rearrangement, like a room being made ready for a guest. The illustrations, he said. They are the best work I have done, she said. I am not going to pretend otherwise. No, he said. I have noticed that you do not pretend about things you consider important. A pause. Very well. Tell me what you need from me. What she needed from him was a signed statement and his presence at a meeting with Rosalind, which he provided the following morning with the composure of a man who has navigated worse institutional entanglements in worse centuries. Rosalind, for her part, did not visibly react to anything about Rafferty Aldenmore except to ask him 3 precise questions about the dates on Holloway's correspondence, which he answered with equal precision, and to observe afterward to Winifred that he had the most accurate memory she had ever encountered in a witness. He has had practice, Winifred said, which Rosalind received with the equanimity of a woman who has decided not to ask certain questions. The formal complaint was filed on a Friday. Holloway's response arrived the following Monday, not to Rosalind's office, but to Winifred's lodgings on Carver Street, in the form of a personal visit that she had not invited and did not welcome. He was a compact man of perhaps 55, with the particular energy of someone accustomed to acquiring things and the particular irritation of someone who has recently been obstructed. He stood in her small sitting room and looked at her botanical sketches on the wall, and her ink-stained hands, and her general air of being entirely unimpressed by him, and he said, You have made a significant error, Miss Alcott. I am not without means of retaliation. I am aware, she said. She did not offer him a seat, because she did not want him to stay long enough to need one. You may retaliate as you see fit. The complaint stands and the evidence is already with the Society's secretary. Whatever you do to me afterward changes none of that. Your publisher, he said. Your commissions. I have influence in those circles. You do, she agreed. And Garvey's involvement in your scheme is documented in your own correspondence, which is now also with the Society's secretary. If you move against my commissions, the question of why you would do so becomes a matter of record. She looked at him steadily. I am not a wealthy woman, Mr. Holloway. I have very little to lose that you could take without also losing something yourself. He left without saying anything further, which she took as a favorable sign. She sat down after he had gone and discovered that her hands were trembling slightly, which she considered a reasonable response, and allowed for approximately 2 minutes before making tea and returning to the specimen sketches she had been working on. The Royal Society's decision arrived 3 weeks later. Holloway's membership was suspended pending review of his methods. His application for a formal examination of any private individual was denied. The letter was brief and institutional and the most satisfying thing Winifred had read in several months. She brought a copy to Vellum Lane. Rafferty read it at the desk. He read it twice, which she understood was thoroughness rather than disbelief. Then he set it down and was quiet for a moment in a way that had a different quality than his usual silences, something released in it, something that had been held a long time. "Thank you," he said. "We are even," she said. "More or less." "Are we?" He looked at her with those amber eyes and something almost wry in his expression. "You came here to expose me. Then you protected me. Then you faced down Holloway in your sitting room, apparently without assistance. I am not certain even is the correct accounting. I also made you complicit in a formal complaint to the Royal Society," she said, "which cannot have been comfortable." "I have been uncomfortable before," he said, "in more consequential centuries." A pause. "The illustrations. You said you wanted to finish them. If you will permit it." He considered this for a moment that was not quite a moment. It had the texture of something longer, something that encompassed more history than she could see. "There is something I have not told you," he said, "about my nature, not the fact of it. I think you have assembled that adequately on your own, but the particular shape of it." She waited. "I am not," he said, "what the stories describe. I do not require what the stories say I require. The curse, if it can be called that, has been modified over time, by choice, by considerable effort, by the assistance of someone wiser than I was, a very long time ago." He paused. "I tell you this because you have earned an honest account, and because I find that I am tired of being known only partially." She thought about the letter from 1743, about the specimens that bloomed only at night, about the way he moved through darkness as though it were simply another kind of light. "How long?" she said. "Since before this city had its current name," he said. She absorbed this. "That explains the botanical knowledge," she said. He looked at her. "That is your primary observation." "It is my first observation," she said. "I have others. I am organizing them." She looked at her sketchbook. "May I ask you something?" "You have never asked permission before," he said. "I found it refreshing." "What do you want?" she said. "Not from the complaint, not from the manuscript, from this." She indicated the study, the specimens, the space between them that had been, over the past weeks, slowly filling with something she did not yet have a word for. "What do you actually want?" He was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that, she had learned, meant he was being careful with something he considered important. "I have wanted, for a very long time," he said, "to be known without being used, to be trusted without being managed, to have someone sit in this study and be genuinely present, without an agenda." He looked at her. "I understand that your presence here began with an agenda." "It did," she said. "And now I am here because I want to be," she said, "and because the specimens are extraordinary, and because you make very bad tea, which I find oddly endearing, and I cannot explain why." Something shifted in him, not dramatically, not visibly, but she felt it the way one feels a change in weather before it arrives. "The tea," he said, "is a genuine failure. I have had centuries to improve and have chosen not to, which I suspect says something unflattering about my character." "It says you are honest about your limitations," she said. "I find that more interesting than competence." They sat in the study for another hour, with the bad tea going cold and the specimen sketches spread between them. And the particular quality of the silence was the comfortable kind, the kind that does not require filling, that trusts itself to be enough. It was not, she understood, a simple thing. The trust between them was partial and new, and would require time and honesty to become something sturdier. She had come to him with a lie, and that fact did not disappear because she had subsequently done something right. He knew it. She knew it. They were both, in their different ways, people who preferred accuracy to comfort. But she was there, and he had let her in, and the specimens, spread across the desk between them, were the finest work she had ever done. It was Rosalind who pointed out, some weeks later, that Winifred had been spending every Tuesday and Thursday on Vellum Lane for 2 months and had begun referring to Rafferty Aldenmore's study as the good room, with a possessiveness she did not appear to notice. "I am finishing the illustrations," Winifred said. "You finished the illustrations 3 weeks ago," Rosalind said. "You showed them to me. They were complete." Winifred looked at her sketchbook. "There are supplementary specimens," she said. "There are always supplementary specimens," Rosalind said, with the patience of someone who has decided to allow a friend to arrive at her own conclusions in her own time. "How is Mr. Aldenmore?" "He is well," Winifred said. "He is attempting to make better tea. He has not succeeded. He seems to find this funnier than I would expect." Rosalind smiled. "Yes," she said. "That does sound like a man who is well." The manuscript was delivered to Garvey's Press, a different arrangement, negotiated by Rosalind, that bypassed Halloway entirely and went directly to a scientific publisher with a better reputation and no interest in the author's personal history. The illustrations were bound with it. The work was, by any measure, exceptional. Garvey, who had the grace to be embarrassed, paid the full commission without argument. Now, in the anteroom of the Drayford Assembly Hall, with Cornelius Fenn staring at her and the letter from the register office pressed against her ribs, Winifred Aldenmore, as of that morning, allowed herself the small, specific pleasure of watching a man who had spent years making her feel like furniture revise his understanding of the room. "Married," Fenn said. He had the expression of someone who has encountered a step that was not there. "To whom?" "Rafferty Aldenmore," she said. "He is a botanist, and a physician, and several other things." She tucked the letter back into her coat. "He is also, I should mention, the oldest man in this room, by a considerable margin, though you would not know it to look at him." Fenn opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. Rosalind, at Winifred's elbow, said, in a voice pitched for Winifred alone, "That was extremely well done." "I have been saving it," Winifred said. She did not stay for the rest of the announcement. She had somewhere better to be. The house on Vellum Lane was lit when she arrived, properly lit, with lamps in the windows, which was a recent development, and one she suspected was on her account, since she did not share his ease with darkness. Rafferty was in the study, which was where he generally was, reading something that appeared to be in Latin. "How was it?" he said, without looking up. "Fenn announced his engagement," she said, setting her coat on the chair, "and told me, in front of witnesses, that no one had wanted me." He looked up then. His expression was the particular kind of still that preceded something precise. "I see," he said. "I showed him the letter from the register office," she said. His face was worth the entire journey. Rafferty set down the Latin text. He looked at her with those amber eyes, and there was a quality she kept misreading as patience that was warm in a way she was still, after months, learning to receive, not used to it yet, not entirely, but no longer inclined to deflect it. "Winifred," he said, "I want to be clear about something." "You generally are," she said. "I did not marry you to give you a weapon against Cornelius Fenn," he said. "I want that on record." "I know," she said, "but it was a very satisfying secondary benefit." He stood and crossed the study to where she was standing, and he took her ink-stained hand in his. His hands were always slightly cool, which she had stopped noticing in the way one stops noticing the particular angle of light in a room one knows well. And he said, "The trust is still being rebuilt. I am aware of that." "Yes," she said. "But it is being rebuilt," he said. "That is the part I want to hold on to." She looked at him, at this man who had lived through cities losing their names, who made terrible tea without apology, who had let her back through his door when he had every reason not to. And she turned her hand over so that their fingers were properly interlaced, ink-stained, and cool together. "It is," she said, slowly. "Which is I think the appropriate pace for something one intends to keep. Outside, November was doing what November does, settling into itself, gray and patient, with the smell of coal smoke and wet stone and the particular stillness of a city preparing for winter. Inside the study on Vellum Lane, the specimens pressed between glass on the shelves, and the manuscript was gone to press, and the bad tea things sat on the desk, and two people who had come to each other by the wrong road sat with their hands joined in the lamplight, building something that did not yet have a name, but was, unmistakably, being built.